Hi everyone, this video is about writing an interesting thesis, and it's based on this idea of the three-story thesis. And I hope you find it useful. So we know the thesis is the most important sentence in your essay. It's the sentence that gives the main point of the whole essay, and the reason that the reader is reading it at all is to find that main point, right? So you want the thesis to be meaningful. You want it to make a claim that is not obvious, right? That not everybody knows already. And of course, something that therefore you have to prove, right? Something that you have to support. So when the thesis comes in usually the first paragraph or someplace in the introduction, the reader will think, oh, that's interesting. I'm not sure if I agree with that, but I want to see your reasons. And then the body paragraphs will supply those reasons, right? So the three-story thesis should not just be a fact. We call a fact a one-story thesis. And a one-story thesis is not an argument. It's not anything that anyone could disagree with. And it doesn't need support because it's just true. You hope it's true, right? And for that reason, it's not a good thesis. For example, the sky is blue. I couldn't write a whole essay to support that idea, and no one could really disagree with it except to say, well, sometimes it is, but other times it's not, right? And that's an example of a one-story thesis, and that's why you don't want just a fact to be your thesis. A two-story thesis is an argument. An argument is something that people could disagree with, but you have to support in order to show is true. So another example of an argument that you've probably seen in real life is in a courtroom where a lawyer has to argue that their client, somebody who's accused of a crime, is guilty or not guilty. Right, so their argument is this person is accused of stealing a car, but actually he didn't do it, right? And I'm going to give you the reasons why. So that's an argument, because obviously some people disagree, and I have to give support for it, okay? On the other hand, if I say he's accused of stealing a car and he did it, he definitely did it, I'm going to show you how I know that. For the same reason, that's also an argument, right? Someone could disagree with that, and in order to prove that that's true, I have to give my support. I have to give my reasons, right? So lawyers make an argument when they go to court, and you want to make an argument when you are writing an essay, right? So that's a two-story thesis, but you can have an even deeper thesis than that, which is the three-story thesis. The three-story thesis has a deeper meaning than just an argument. I think it's better to show you what I mean than just try to explain it at this point. So I'm going to give you some more examples of the three types of theses here. So let's say in our essay, this is the prompt. Okay, so this is the question that we have to answer in our essay. Discuss the role of habits in the success and or failure of an international student in university. Okay, so I have some ideas of what I might say about this, but let's look at some examples of what could be a good thesis or not so good thesis to answer this prompt. So a one-story thesis, again, is just a fact. So nobody could disagree with it unless it's wrong, but still there's nothing else to say about it other than the fact that it's wrong. And how could you support it? It's hard to support something that's just true and doesn't require any deep thinking, okay? This microphone is black, for example. I can't really support it other than to point at it and say, see that? Yes, it is. Okay. So an example of a one-story thesis that would answer that prompt that we just saw is everyone has habits. So I can't imagine anyone disagreeing with this, right? It's impossible to disagree with, and it's hard to give support for, partly for that reason. Um, all I could do to support it is just list some habits that people have, right? But there's really no need to, because no one could ever disagree with this, right? So what's even more dangerous than a one-story thesis is a zero-story thesis. A zero-story thesis, if you imagine a house with 0 stories, it's just the floor, I guess. A zero-story thesis doesn't even answer the prompt. And in the papers that I usually see that have a thesis like this, the zero-story thesis that's not answering the prompt is usually just saying that they will answer the prompt later. Okay, so for example, in this paper I will discuss the role of habits among international students in university. It's very tempting to think of this as a good thesis because the reader knows what the topic is, but they don't know what your argument is. They don't know what you think about this topic, right? Some of your teachers would say it doesn't have a controlling idea. A controlling idea means what you think about the topic, right? What your argument is about the topic. This is also a bad thesis to have in an essay, because your thesis is supposed to give the main point of your paper, and your main point is not, I will answer the main point later, right? Your main point should be the answer to the question. If you've ever seen a math test where someone answered a question like, in this space I will answer the question, they didn't really answer the question, right? It's the same thing in an essay. Your thesis should answer the question, not say that you will answer the question later. Okay, so I call this a zero-story thesis. I've never heard of someone else talking about a zero-story thesis before, but this is what I call a zero-story thesis. It's a thesis that announces that you have an answer instead of answering the question. Okay, but back to the 1, 2, 3-story thesis. A 2-story thesis in most cases is the minimum that you should do for an essay, right? The minimum amount of depth and meaning that you should have is a 2-story thesis, because a 2-story thesis is an argument. An argument should not be obvious. For example, this person stole a car or this person did not steal a car. It's not obvious to anyone watching that that is true or false. You still have to give your reasons for it. And you can imagine someone not accepting it, not accepting that your argument is true until you give your reasons, right? That's what makes an argument an argument. As a rule of thumb means a general rule. If you can imagine a reasonable person disagreeing with it, it's probably an argument. If you can't imagine someone disagreeing with it, it's probably a fact. Okay. So, an example for this prompt might be, habits play an especially large role in the success of international students. Notice that this answers the question in the prompt, and because of the words especially and large here, someone could disagree with this. They might say, I'm not sure if that's true, right? I'm not sure if they play an especially large role for international students. And please tell me your reasons if you think this is true. So this is an argument. Someone could disagree with it, and they would need to hear my reasons before they believe me. That's the sign of a good thesis at the very minimum. Okay. So the third story, the 3-story thesis attaches some deeper meaning to the argument. You can think of it as a 2-story thesis plus one more bit that gives deeper meaning to the argument in the 2-story thesis. Okay. So the deeper meaning is often outside of your answer to the original question. So, what role do habits play in success or failure for international students? You can answer the question and then say, and this shows that, right? And that last part, and this shows that, is not exactly answering the question. It's just giving a deeper meaning to that answer. Okay? And the reason that teachers like this kind of thesis is because be able to see deeper meaning in your argument, you have to understand your argument very well. You have to understand the topic very well. And if you don't understand them very well, you really can't think of a deeper meaning for it. So if you have a deeper meaning for your argument, it shows you've thought deeply about it and you really understand the topic and what you're saying about it. Okay. So an example for that prompt might be the fact that habits play a especially large role in failure among international students shows that the challenge of international university education goes far beyond language. So like I said, there's a part at the beginning which is sort of like a two-story thesis argument, and then there's a section at the end that is the deeper meaning of that argument, right? So I have basically a two-story thesis plus something extra, and that makes it a three-story thesis, right? So to break this down visually, the part at the beginning answers the prompt, says, the role of habits is this. And the part at the end says, and this shows that some bigger topic, some bigger issue. Okay. So if you don't know how to write a three-story thesis, you can begin by writing a two-story thesis, and then at the end of that, add a little bit of language that says which means that, or that shows that, and that's where your third story will go. Okay. So to give another example, explain how a habit of yours encourages or impedes success in university. Let's say that this is a prompt. You can answer the prompt and you can give meaning in separate sections. So you might say, my habit of playing League of Legends with friends in China impedes my success by limiting my social life. So that's the two-story thesis that answers the question, and I'm going to add the third story below, which shows that even non-academic habits contribute to academic success, right? So this is just a formula that you can use for writing a three-story thesis. And this is an example for this particular prompt, but of course your prompt is different, right? Okay, so this is just some language that you can use for getting to the third story. If you have written a two-story thesis and you want to add a third story to it, you can just add this to your two-story thesis, which means that, which shows that, just add this at the end and then finish the sentence. The fact that blah, blah, blah demonstrates that blah, blah, blah. The two-story thesis will go in the first blank and the third story will go in the second blank. And the same for the last example, okay? So I hope this has been helpful. I hope you can use these tips and this language for writing a deep thesis that your teacher will enjoy and be impressed by. And if you want to see the original version of the three-story thesis, it's not my idea, by the way. I got it from this article here. You can read this article and see what the original authors say about writing a three-story thesis. All right, thanks for listening.